We're going through this sermon series called Teach Us to Pray, and it's looking at the Lord's Prayer. And we got the title from, now Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray." So that's from Luke chapter 11, and that's kind of where we got it. Because the Lord's Prayer is one of those things that, I feel like, at least when I was growing up, it's just like, okay, yeah, it's nice. We said it every week at church, and maybe we said it sometimes, outside of there, but it really didn't mean much to me. And then all of a sudden, I kind of started studying it. And I'm like, wow, this thing is a treasure trove of deepness. And so last week we had Our Father in Heaven. And the whole idea behind that was that Jesus wants us to pray richer prayers and fearless prayers. Basically, he wants us to know that we can come to the Father, calling him kind of Daddy, Father. And we can come to the Father, and the Father is inviting us into the party. Right? That was kind of the idea, that you can come right to the Father. You don't have to worry about if your prayer is good enough or all of that. So that you can come right there. And that's kind of what we talked about last week. And this week, we have the next section of the Lord's Prayer. It's called Hallowed Be Your Name. Actually, I realized after I made the slide, which was last night, that I made a mistake, and I'm too lazy to fix it. It's supposed to be, hallowed be thy name, right? If you're going to use hallowed, you got to use thy, right? Because hallowed, that's a word we use in everyday English, right? You guys use hallowed ever? Like no, right? Like that's you don't have a particularly good slice of cake. Sometimes you're like, that's a hallowed piece of cake right there. Like that never happens. Well, what's the other word for that? It's holy, right? It's holy. There's another word that we never use. So how I couldn't come up with a circumstance. So maybe one of you can yell it out. Do one of you have a circumstance where you use the word holy and it had nothing to do with like churchy stuff at all? Do what? Holy cow? Yeah. I'm sure you guys are all using holy cow. I didn't even think about that. So, holy goodness, I think that's kind of the same thing. So yeah, using it as a swear, great. That's not a swear. What is it then? You're saying something good. Holy goodness? Holy mackerel? Mackerel is a fish, right? Yeah. Like that's what, I guess, what did Jesus, like do the 5 loaves, 2 fish? Were those mackerels? Is that where yeah. Holy mackerel. So but it's one of those things where outside of that, we don't really talk about that word holy much. We don't say it much. Although I realize now that you guys probably say it a lot. Like that's like that because you all laughed, and that's so funny. But yeah, but it doesn't, like the word holy itself in its intended definition doesn't get used all that much outside of like that churchy realm, right? I kind of made that joke about that's a hallowed piece of cake, but we don't really use it like that. So what does holy mean? Does anyone know? Sacred of God. It means set apart, which was what sacred means. But it means set apart. It means kind of that something's kind of set apart and kind of special, right? Like that. So that's like looking at that. When I think of holy and set apart, it's easy to think about our solar system, and there's one body in our solar system that's set apart from the other ones. Which one is that? The sun, right? And the sun is super special and set apart in our solar system because it acts differently than all the other ones. What would happen if NASA sent a spaceship to the sun? Would it ever get to the sun? Not in its full form, would it? Like that's because it would melt, and no matter how good they brought it, it was. So the sun is set apart and special in our solar system, and that's kind of the thing that's fascinating about it. The sun is amazingly powerful. Like it's amazingly powerful. I have a feeling eventually we're going to have a whole lot more solar going on and all that stuff. But pretty much all of our energy, even the stuff that we bury up, it comes up as crude oil, was all here because of the sun, right? And the sun's energy onto the planet. And it's so powerful. Now, we had a display of the power last fall. Do you remember the eclipse? Now, what did they all say during the eclipse on every newscast, everything? What? Don't look at it. Why did they not want you to look at it? Because it'll make you blind. Like it would actually make you blind, right? Like that's, and the reason why is because you'd actually be staring at it, and just like trying to see the eclipse. And I heard some people are like, well, why? What makes it different in the eclipse than like a normal sun? Well, the normal sun is just, it's so bright that you're like, ow, and you don't really want to look at it. But the eclipse, there was actually something to look at, so we'd look past the pain. But the eclipse even takes the power of the sun down, and it's something that could blind us, right? That sense of holiness, that sense of set apartness is kind of the sense of the holiness of God. And we get that sense in Isaiah chapter 6. And Isaiah chapter 6 is this amazing verse here. So it says in Isaiah chapter 6, we'll kind of look through this. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting up on a throne, high and lifted up, and the train of his robe filled the temple. All right, the year King Uzziah died, I could preach a sermon on that phrase right now, okay? And if anyone is curious, go look and see what that means. It's kind of fascinating. But it's setting up how you should feel during this verse. And so King Uzziah died, but what's it saying then? It's saying that God is huge, that his robes are filling up the entire temple. And then it says, and above him stood the seraphim. Each had 6 wings, 2 that covered their face, 2 that covered his feet, and 2 with which he flew. And what's interesting here is these seraphim, they're covering their face and they're covering their feet, all of that, and then the 2 others, they flew. Why are they covering their face and feet? Do you have any idea? The holiness of God. that's the easy answer. But yeah, they're worried about their own protection, right? They're worried about their own protection in the holiness of God. They're covering themselves. It's kind of like, back when you used to play softball with like your work, or maybe you had that one church that had the softball group, and you play softball, and always those softball games are not on like quality fields, and someone hits just a super fast ground ball, and you're playing in left field, and that ball is going down this super rough field. Now, you as a company softball player in the left field have to stop this ball, and it's bouncing all around and on this rough field. Do you stand there in confidence and stop it? No. You protect yourself, right? You're like, I'm going to stop that, because that ball is going to take a bad bounce and you're going to go to work the next day without your front teeth, right? Like you just know that's going to happen. That's kind of what's going on with these seraphim. They're blocking themselves. They know that it's dangerous and it's hurting, right? And so they're covering themselves up, and they say, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of all the armies, of all the hosts. The whole earth is filled with his glory. Holy, holy, holy," or set apart, set apart, set apart is the Lord. His whole earth is filled with his glory, and the foundations and the thresholds, they shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. It's a weird vision, but it's a vision that exudes power and holiness and set apartness. And Isaiah has an appropriate response to this. He's like, oh man, I am undone. Woe is me. For I am lost, or I am undone. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the Lord of hosts. God is too big even for him. He's too holy even for him. He's realized that his life is kind of messed up and that he can't even be in the presence of God. And he's looking at himself saying, I am undone. I am about to face destruction. I relate to that sometimes. I don't know if you guys do too, but there's sometimes when you're around something so holy and good, you're like, I'm not good enough for this. Has anyone ever met anybody famous before? And you saw that person and you walked up to him and you were going to say something intelligent and smart to him and just came out? Yeah, it was you. Yeah, have you ever had that situation? Suddenly you got around whoever that was to you. I have no idea, right? Suddenly you get around that person and you're like, oh my gosh, and you're starstruck and you're just like, I am undone, right? And I think that same emotion is what Isaiah is feeling just a little bit. And I think we can understand that. And I think we try to overcome that feeling sometimes where we try to make ourselves worthy of God or God's name sometimes, where we try to have a perfect holy life, where we try to make it happen on our own, where we feel like we can stand before God based upon our own merits. That I'm not sure if we know that this is what happens in ourselves, but I think we feel like I got to be able to stand up on my own before God. So we try to have that perfect family, perfect marriage. We try to have all those perfect things. We try to be perfect. And so we end up spending all of our efforts trying to just improve ourselves. And oftentimes I think that causes us to kind of be alone in that. Where we're trying so hard to be perfect that we end up pushing others aside that aren't part of our perfection plan. And I think Isaiah is realizing it's like, this is just, it's all futile. It's all nothing. Like, no matter how good my life was, no matter how perfect my marriage was, no matter how perfect, it's not set apart enough. It's not holy. I'm a man of unclean lips. It's almost like, if we were on a rocket ship going right to the sun, right? And Isaiah realizes like, soon we are going to burn up by the sun's rays. It's a lot of pressure on us sometimes. It's like, how do we stay in God's presence? In fact, this kind of reminds me of leprosy. Leprosy is interesting in the Gospels. It's also interesting trying to figure out what pictures to show about leprosy for the presentation on church on Sunday. Because leprosy is terrible. Like, it's parts of your body just kind of rotting away. And I had a couple pictures, I was like, no. Like, that's like, you got someone eating a donut and you're like, oh, like it's just awful over there. And then you have like more modern art of it, and it's just someone with like a bandage wrapped around like one arm. And I was like, that doesn't show it either. So you got to kind of go to this old stuff, and you see these old ones, they have sores all over them. But what's interesting about leprosy is that everyone believed it was contagious. They believed that it was so contagious that you would have to make a leper set apart. That even if you breathe the same air as someone with leprosy, that you could get it too. And so they would take everyone with leprosy and they'd put them into huge leper colonies, right? And they'd put them all there and they would set them apart. That their unholiness And the thing is with leprosy, the kind of prevailing belief is that their uncleanness was more powerful than any cleanness you would bring to them. That their uncleanness would cover your cleanness and would drag you into that. And I think that's a good analogy for holiness, because I think many times we believe that our unholiness is actually greater than true holiness. That somehow we come into church or into God's spaces and we will corrupt and make unholy God's space. That we believe that is going to happen, that our unholiness is greater than God's holiness, that it's like leprosy, that it'll actually make it worse there. But Isaiah turns this around. There's this scene in Isaiah then where he says, "Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, and your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for." What does that mean? What is going on in that phrase? What is happening here? There's a turnaround. There's a turnaround. Because everybody believed to that point that it's like, we got to have that middle point in where God's holiness is, and we got to make sure we're clean there. We got to make sure that we're good there. We got to make sure everything's good. You guys remember, some of you have read Leviticus. Leviticus is all about those like purification laws, right? Like what happens when you touch something dead? You're unclean, right? And you can't go into this temple or anything like that till you are cleaned. Ladies, when it's your time of the month, what does the Bible say about you? You're dirty, right? You got to go through ritual cleansings in order to be able to be close to God. That's why the woman at the well is such a big story. Like that we believed for so far, and I think there's parts of us now that even believe this, that we believe that our unholiness, our uncleanliness actually affects the holy and purity of God. But in Isaiah, we see that God is doing something new. That just an ember, a coal from God's holy altar comes up and touches Isaiah. And does Isaiah, who has an unclean lips and as all of his people are unclean, does he make that coal unclean? No. All of the holiness then imparts on to Isaiah himself. And all his guilt is taken away and his sin atoned for. That's something new. And that's kind of abstract though. But what we end up seeing is that we see a leper coming up. We see this actually exemplified in Jesus, because a leper comes up to Jesus and he says, "Jesus, I want to be clean. I want to be clean." And Jesus is like, "All right." And he touches him. And does that leper's leprosy and uncleanness jump to Jesus? No. His cleanliness, his holiness goes over to the guy with leprosy. And it says immediately the leprosy left him and he was clean. And Jesus is turning water into wine. He's healing the blind. He's doing all these things. It's the same story as from Isaiah, where God is coming in and he's bringing his kingdom of God, and he's bringing about holiness and cleanliness to all of these people, to all of them around this area. And what we end up seeing is that God's holiness is greater than any of our own unholiness. So what does this mean? Sometimes I believe that we think that death is winning. That death has won the day. That unholiness, the unholy people around us are winning. But Isaiah with his coal Jesus with touching the leper, and with Jesus dying and rising again, it says that no light and life and holiness is winning the day. That it's winning the day, and everything that it's touching is bringing about holiness. So when we pray, Lord, hallowed be your name, holy is your name, we are praying that we know that God's holiness has touched us. That God's holiness has touched us and He's made us holy. And when we are holy, then we recognize God's holiness by what He has done. I hope this makes sense, because it's kind of complex. Basically, God's holiness is greater than any of our unholiness. And when we pray, Lord, hallowed be your name, we are saying, yes, Lord, your holiness is greater than any amount of unholiness in me, that it's overcoming me and making me holy. So, to summarize, our Father who is in heaven, God is bringing us into His kingdom, into the party. And He says, you are my sons and daughters. Come to me freely. Come to me freely and fearless. And know that my holiness is greater than any unholiness of yours. And I'm making you holy. So that's where we are right now in the Lord's Prayer. Let us say a prayer.